This is a panel that the Family Resource Center has put together to talk about affordable housing in Washington County. Now, we have a really great group of people, and this is exactly the panel that I wanted to have. And so I'm so pleased that we were able to all come tonight. People are making great personal sacrifices involving water or baseball games by not being there and being here, or line dancing. Anyway, I'm going to introduce very briefly our panel because we only have a little more than an hour. And what we want to do is have a conversation about affordable housing. There's going to be an opportunity to write questions down on the little note card that's been handed out to all of you. And so during the event, if you'd write out questions that you might have, put them on the note card, and then during the evening, we'll have someone come down and collect them from you. And then we'll take those note cards, and then we'll read your question and have the panel address those questions. It's a big topic. We're going to cover a lot of information. I hope there's a few little takeaways that you'll bring with you after the evening's over. Housekeeping stuff. There'll be a little reception afterwards. If there's some questions that you would have for each other or panelists, we'll do that out in the narthex as you leave the sanctuary. Restrooms are just down the hallway. This is being recorded by Valley Access Channels, and so it's going to be available for you to look at later, and we'll provide a link on our website to that. There'll also be a link on the Valley Access cable channel website, and we'll be able to get that information to you. On the little program that we gave you, that's that little half sheet of paper, it has all the information about the panelists, or where you can learn more about the agencies that they are representing and what they do. And so feel free to do that. All these links are also available online digitally so that you can just click on those and read about the Community Development Agency. All of those are there, for example. So feel free to use that and take this with you. Having said that, we're going to get right into what we're doing. I'm going to start we'll start down that way with John Duffy. John is the president of Duffy Development, and what John's been doing for a long time, since the mid-'80s, I think that's on. What John's been doing since the mid-'80s is his company has been building and owning residential office and warehouse facilities, as well as neighborhood retail projects throughout Wisconsin and Minnesota and northern Iowa. John has served on dozens and dozens of state and civic committees over the years and several professional organizations in the construction industry. John is very active and involved in the construction of affordable housing in suburban areas and has dedicated his company really to that mission. And it's an important mission, and we're going to learn from the private developer's standpoint what can be done to create affordable housing. And John's resume and his background is also available online, and I challenge you all to take a few minutes and look at it. It's really impressive. Sitting next to John is Cynthia Parsons.
No.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's down that way. I got you guys switched up. That's funny. Yeah, I better know who Cindy is. That would be bad. Sue Watloff Phillips, who's the executive director of MICA. And who here has had any interactions with MICA? Do you know who MICA is? MICA is an incredible organization and has been bringing this issue of affordable housing to the metropolitan area, not only the metropolitan area, although that is your core mission. The state legislature hears about affordable housing because of MICA, and they are really important as far as the statewide and metro-wide conversation about what affordable housing is and what the crisis is that we've entered into now. I encourage you all to spend some time on the MICA website. It's an amazing website and providing almost daily updates on anything about affordable housing that's happening in the Twin Cities metropolitan area. It's an incredible resource for city leaders, county leaders, and for citizens just to learn about what affordable housing issues are and what good people of faith are doing to involve themselves in that issue. Sue does these kinds of forums a lot, and you'll see why. So I've raised the bar, but not that high. You can do it. On the other side of me is Barb Dacey. Barb is the executive director of the Community Development Agency for Washington County, and Barb has been doing this a long, long time. Is it 35 years? No, not that long. But it is almost that long. Barb and CDA has been instrumental in really bringing this issue to home here in Washington County. And just recently developed a senior housing development, which is really amazing and very, very important. But I think it's important for folks to know that CDA actually owns and operates over 1,000 units of affordable housing throughout Washington County. Having said that, and Barb will be the first one to say this, it's just scratching the surface. And they can't do it by themselves. Micah can't do it by themselves. John can't do it by themselves. It takes everybody to make this happen. These are the folks that are making a difference, and I want to thank Barb for being here.
Thank you.
She's got some really important information to share with us about that. Now, sitting next to her is the person that I know at the Family Resource Center. Cynthia Parsons is the executive director of the Family Resource Center, whose mission it is to help people who don't have housing, who are just clinging onto their housing to retain it. Cindy used to work for Episcopal Community Services, and when they closed their statewide agency, Cindy said to their directors and the folks there that this mission that you do is important enough that I want to keep it here in Stillwater. And so Cindy founded and funded the St. Croix Family Resource Center to address those issues on a local basis, to help clients keep or stay in their housing or find housing. And so Cindy brings a real personal perspective to what's actually happening here on the ground in Washington County. Cindy used to be the chairperson of the County Commissioners Social Services Advisory Council as a layperson, and brings a lot of experience with working in this area with people whose lives are being affected by the affordable housing crisis. My name's Bob Dickey. I'm the development director of the Family Resource Center, and I helped Cindy co-found the agency when Episcopal Community Services closed several years ago. And my role in all of this is just to ask questions and to move the conversation along. This isn't a formal presentation. We don't have written remarks. We're just going to talk with each other, and you guys get to listen about what really is the issue about affordable housing in Washington County, and then join in afterwards with your own questions. Having said that, I'm going to throw out to the panel the first question, and that is, what is affordable housing, and how do we define that? Who'd like to take a swing at that?
All right, I'll jump in. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming. So, the Community Development Agency, we assist communities to accomplish their housing and economic development goals. So, when I say the word housing, what we believe is that a strong and healthy community has a variety of options, housing options and styles and types that are available at price points that are affordable to folks along the entire income spectrum, from very low incomes to very high incomes. So if you think for example, you go into a grocery store, if you just saw all vegetables or all kale, that wouldn't be, that's healthy, but that's not a very diverse supply of food, or if it's all steak. So the analogy I'm trying to draw here is that a community has all of these options, so folks, as they move through these life stages, that they can remain in their community if they so choose and find that right fit. So affordable homes, I like to call them rental homes, and the traditional single-family home, if you are transitioning out of homelessness to have an apartment, is truly amazing. If you are a worker here in the county, but you cannot afford to find an apartment with an affordable rent that matches your income, then there's a disparity there. And then if you're a senior that is paying way too much of their restricted income on housing costs, then there is a disparity there. So what we're trying to do is create home, whether it's rental or owner-occupied, for folks all along the spectrum. And right now, the gaps are for folks that work in the county but cannot afford to find a home or an apartment because of the housing costs. Traditionally, the rule of thumb is 30% of one's income, but the concept of home to the CDA is that if you have a home, then it is well documented that you're going to be on a more successful path. And finally, I'll keep it short, finally, to think of this issue from a community perspective, it's not only about our housing stock, but it's also about our economy. If businesses can't find workers because they can't find a place to live, or people are having to drive long distances, that's also an economic issue and a transportation issue. So from 30,000 feet, when it comes down to it, home is central to all of these issues, and home is central to our communities.
Thank you, Barb. Yes, John.
Can I just throw out, besides the economics, the home is a place you got to feel safe, that your kids are safe, that you enjoy coming back to, and that you're kind of proud that you can bring your neighbors and friends over to, too. We've got a lot of rental properties, and we really find that people respond to how they are treated. If they're giving a very nice place to live, and it's kept up, and they understand that we want to see it kept up, we want the neighborhood to see it kept up, they respond to that and they treat the property very well. And conversely, I've seen other developments too, where if you don't take care of the property, it just sort of continues to go downhill. So it's a place that people want, they want to be there and they want to associate with it, and we try to treat them that way.
Go ahead.
So with MICA, our mission is that everyone, without exception, will have a safe, decent, and accessible and affordable home. So how many of you ever rented? Okay. 97% or more of the American population rented at some point in their life. And so many of us have moved from rental into home ownership. So we know what it was affordable for us when we were renting, and that we tend to buy places that we then own that are affordable to us. So as Barb said, is that typically the rule of thumb is 25 to 30% of your income should go into housing. So I grew up in the 50s and 60s and started renting in the early 70s. So my first place, I rented for $125. How many of you rented for $125 at your first place? Okay. Or less. Okay. Less. Yeah. I mean, I had a 4-bedroom home that I rented for $200 back in the 70s. So housing costs have changed dramatically. And so now, for you to be able to afford a 2-bedroom here in the Stillwater area, you need to be making $22 an hour working full-time, okay? And you have some of that information in your packet. We'll talk more about that. But what the issue is that what we knew in the 50s, 60s, and 70s has changed dramatically over the last 4 decades, and we'll get into some of the reasons for that.
Thank you. Cindy, did you have anything you'd like to add? The real-life perspective of what affordable housing means to your clients and to your agency.
Well, I think even at 30%, if you have a really low income and you have children, that other 70% does not cover all your other expenses.
Yeah, we've talked an awful lot about how daycare has become really expensive and makes having that disposable income for paying rent even tougher. And then when you live in a county like we do right now that has limited public transportation, a lot of your dollars go into trying to get anywhere. And if you have a broken down car, that can really impact on your ability to continue to pay your rent and stay in your house or your home. So those are some of the issues that kind of the flyover piece of that. How serious is the question of affordable housing and the lack of it in Washington County? What are your perspectives on that? We'll go to Washington County, but then I also want to get a metro-wide kind of sense of that also from you, Sue.
Well, it has been a serious issue for quite some time. So if you think about our communities demographically, I'm sure you know that we have the aging baby boomer generation, but we also have the younger folks that are beginning to enter the workforce, and they also want to start a family. So what specifically has happened is that housing costs have been going up for a variety of reasons. Unfortunately, the county leads the state in the terms of the median rent, has the highest rent, so that's a roadblock there.
Could you back up and say that again? Washington County leads the state in the highest rents? Is that
Correct.
what you just said?
The median rent as of 2017. Housing, owner-occupied housing, because it's a desirable place to live and because there's a lower amount of supply of housing. So the median sale price is around $296,000, and that has gone up over the last 2 years. So again, getting back to my earlier comments, the lack of a sufficient supply of housing that is in line with people's wages causes other impacts. So we can't. So younger people that may have grown up here and want to start a family here have a challenge to find a home, a rental home, or an owner-occupied home here in the county. And also for seniors that rent here in the county have a terrific challenge because it's been documented that 69% of renters that are seniors are paying more than 30% of their incomes toward their housing costs. So again, that speaks to the supply. So what is happening is and the direction we need to head is that we have to look at ways to create additional homes for people, but we also have to look at maintaining the homes that are affordable to people right now. And what does that mean? Home improvement programs, and what can we do about rental homes that may be a little older, may not have as many of the amenities, but what can we do to preserve those? And long term, what can we do to preserve the affordable rental homes that John, for example, is building in the future?
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Who do you want me to go?
Go ahead, Sue, you're okay.
So if you did pick up the MICA packet, and if you go to www.mica.org and go under our work, you can get to any of the county profiles that'll give you a lot of that data very quickly, as well as give you the types of fast-growing jobs and if housing is affordable for folks. And as Barb was saying, that's really critical that we understand that. So right now here in Washington County, we have 20,993 households that are cost burden, which means they're paying too much for housing. 7,688 of those are renter households, and 13,305 are homeowners. So we have, this really difficult place where people are paying too much money for housing, but they're in housing, And so the other needs, as Cynthia was saying and other people are saying, they don't have enough money to take care of other things. Now this is true if you also look at the other sheet in there that talks about the entire state. This is true across the state of Minnesota as well as across the United States. I'm vice president of the National Coalition for the Homeless. What we know is 78% of the American population, 78% of the American population lives paycheck to paycheck. Half of the American population, 1/2 of the American population is 1 to 3 paychecks away from not making their rent payment or their mortgage payment. That's how much we live in debt within our society now. And so we have people constantly at risk of becoming homeless.
John?
Well, and I'll say probably the same thing, but a different way. We're always building new developments all over. And it used to be that we would look at where all the jobs were going, and then the transportation corridors would make little circles and identify where we wanted to build, locate, locate, locate. It no longer matters where you build workforce housing. People, you can put it anywhere, people will find you. We just opened one a couple weeks ago. It was going to be available in July. When they were sheetrocking in February, word got out that it was going to be available, and within 2 weeks we had hundreds of applications, and so we just quit taking them. We'd have to triple the number of housing units we're building to even keep up with the need right now.
Cindy, I'd like to ask you what your experience has been with people waiting for housing, and what really does happen to folks if they do lose their housing.
It's a very long wait, very long. We've had many families that have been homeless for over a year. So, they're bouncing from sometimes friends to relatives to hotels that are not safe or healthy to live in, and yet they're expensive. Sometimes they're in their cars, so there's just a lot of, sometimes they're in shelter, out of shelter. You can't stay in shelter for over a year. And so it's just very, very traumatic, and it's a very long wait. There's not enough housing programs. There's a lack of living wages. And then the folks that we work with, they have a lot of other barriers as well, like maybe a car that's very unreliable. And so it's just very, very, very hard. If you put yourself in those shoes and think about it, it's a wonder that they can even wait that long.
And we lose track of some of those people too. They seem to vanish. What are you speculating happens to folks who just can't wait a year to have a place to live?
Well, people, there's not a real good tracking of people that become homeless, and so we really don't know where some of the people go. We hope that they've self-resolved in a way that is going to lead to, safe housing. We know for clients that we've had that have become homeless, we've directed them across the river. Rent is several $100s a month less over there, and there's some good schools, good communities, and they would prefer to be in Stillwater. A lot of them have grown up here, but if it's a matter of having a place and not having a place, they've had to move. More than a handful.
And there's a subset of this group too that you've recently started working with, and that's young adults. Do you want to describe a little bit of what those experiences are like?
Sure. So with our drop-in center for homeless youth or youth with unstable housing, fragile housing, if you have no credit history, no rental history, you don't have an income that's 3 times the rent, all of those barriers, when there's a place for rent, who's that going to go to? It's going to go to that person that doesn't have any barriers. So it makes it a lot harder. We do have one housing program here in Stillwater. It's home free, run by Canvas Health, and it's for youth. You come in as a youth. You have to have a mental health diagnosis, and that's been awesome. We need a whole lot more of those. That's for 5 youth, and that's what we have in Washington County for youth.
Bob, if I could just add to what Cynthia was saying in regards to getting into housing for those of us that are 65 or older. We never paid an application fee. We never had a credit check or a criminal check, and oftentimes we didn't even pay a deposit. Now what oftentimes happens is you have to have 3 times the income of what the rent is. You have to pay first month's rent, damage deposit, and maybe an additional deposit. And plus you're applying for the unit. So you may pay anywhere from the smallest I've seen lately is $45 up to $100 each time you apply for an apartment. Now then if you have mental health or chemical health or criminal issues, that will definitely get in your way of being able to get into housing. So I had a felony 7 years ago with a DUI accident. I've been chemically free for 7.5 years, or alcohol free for 7.5 years. I wasn't chemically dependent, I was alcohol dependent. And, I could not rent. So, and it will be very difficult if I ever decide not to continue to be a homeowner to try to get into rental property, because that felony will follow me the rest of my life, even though I'm off probation.
Thank you for sharing that. And that's not an unusual story. These kinds of barriers are possible only because the housing stock is so small and the demand is so great that landlords can cherry pick who they have for tenants. And that also creates sometimes an incentive to move people out of their housing because they can find a better tenant. Have you all had experiences with that, Cindy? I know you've talked about that with me.
You know, we have some really great subsidized housing developments here in Stillwater. There's a lot of pros and cons to subsidized housing. Of course, a real pro is that you can go to school, and if you are not making any income, you don't pay any rent. But then again, you do need some income for gas and other things. You can still get county help, but there still is things that you need income for. But you know, you can go to school so that you can get that higher income and then have your own, you know, you can buy your own house or something. But there's a lot of cons as well. There's a lot of drama at subsidized housing developments, and there's a lot of, you know, lack of privacy, and you have all these inspections, and so, you know, it's really not that easy to live in subsidized housing.
John, what are some of the barriers to creating more housing from the standpoint of a private developer? What do you need in order for you to be able to do this and make money doing it?
Let's put it, if you're going to be a affordable or workforce housing developer in the private sector, you need to first start out being delusionally optimistic. You're betting that the allowable rents and people's ability to pay those rents is going to exceed what your expenses are going to be. And the last several years, that hasn't been the case. I would, where am I going to go with that? There are resources that help. You know, the tax credit program, of course, is the key one. And, well, let me say this. There's not enough money in the government to ever solve this housing issue. It can't be. So a really brilliant move was to do the tax credit program, which brings in private investment. That's, you know, when years ago, you know, companies would build a big development somewhere, and a factory, and then they'd build worker housing. Now they buy credits, and the federal credit's administered by the state, and then the state decides where that housing should go. That's been a real efficient way to bring money into the economy. It's just not nearly big enough to handle the issues that we've got. It'd have to be expanded a lot. I would, can I actually just tell what the communities are that we have?
Oh, absolutely.
Would you mind if I get, because I dug this out before I came, and they're pretty similar. We've got dozens and dozens of housing communities all through. Now this is just metro area though, and ours are suburbs, 2 and 3 bedroom, family developments. Just to give you an idea of who's living there though, 55% of our units are 2-parent households. We have 1.5 children per household. It used to always be 2.1, forever and ever and ever. And then about 12 years ago, it started dropping down. The great majority of them are mostly preschool or elementary kids. We have 1 to 1.4 cars, it depends on what the transportation options are. Our family incomes range anywhere from about $38,000 to $40,000 average per development, so it's pretty close. That's pretty much the average that's in there. And the number one reason that people move out of these units are to buy a house in that same school district, not the same city, but the same school district. To me, that's been a really interesting thing to watch. I've got a lot of statistics that I'm just going to skip over. One of them is that we are starting to see a few seniors come in. There's seniors actually qualify for this, and some of them like to live in families. They're actually babysitting for a lot of us. So anywhere from 5 to 10% of our units are now occupied by seniors. I could go through a whole list of stuff, but in each community, you can almost tell the community by the jobs that are there. In Minnetonka, there's a lot of retail jobs, restaurant jobs. Everybody has education jobs. You get over here into Woodbury and Wyoming, a lot of medical jobs. People are working in hospitals. They're not doctors, but they're working in hospitals doing something to promote it. Laborers, car driver, 2 lawyers. I guess we still accept lawyers. I didn't know that. But they all have jobs, and they really represent who's in the community. It's just so interesting to look at what do they do, and you can tell what the jobs are and what's going on in the community there. So that's kind of my take. I better stop and let other people.
No, that's fine. John was a part of a TPT documentary that was done a few years ago, and you can link to it on our website, that talked about exactly that, about kind of getting beyond the preconceptions of who lives in affordable housing. And John did I thought, just a wonderful development in Forest Lake, and talked about the challenges of doing it, the pushback he got initially from the city, but eventually how people came to understand that these are people just like the people in this room. They're us. And they're young to old and everybody in between, but most of them are all working and want to have better lives and live in the communities that they grew up in. And when you lose that connection to your community, some bad things can happen. Barb, you wanted to add to that, it looked like?
Yes. First of all, when it comes to housing in our country, the concept of subsidy is includes owner-occupied housing as well as rental housing. So the interest deduction is a tax incentive for folks in the country to pursue home ownership, and that's been a long-standing policy. And when it comes to rental housing, and John was describing that the low-income housing tax credit program is a public-private partnership where the private developer is working with an investor, and there's a promise to keep that affordable for 30 years in exchange for 10 years of a tax credit. So that's the nature, because with affordable housing, your expenses are going to be like this, and your rent has to be down here, and it's the gap that we're trying to fill. And the concept that I want to emphasize is that our community is all of us, the folks that we encounter on a day-to-day basis, and all of us have a range of needs. And some need supportive services along with that, some do not, and can live self-sufficiently, but the goal here is to create a supply of housing that is more in line with people's income. We do know, for example, too, that of all of the affordable homes in the county, rental homes. 2/3 of those are owned by the private sector. So that demonstrates a public-private partnership to help the community move ahead. So I just thought I wanted to share that concept that in housing subsidies apply to a lot of the housing in our country, and our challenge is that we want to create more supply, and that does need resources, but it's part of a complex system as well. We have to find resources to build housing. There's building technology issues. It's not just about land costs, but the labor to build it. So it's a complex process with a lot of levers. And so it's going to take not only the public sector, the private sector, faith communities, nonprofits, businesses, entrepreneurs. How can we all work together to move us along in the economy here?
And Bob, if I could just add a little bit to that. So I asked how many people were renters. How many of you are homeowners now? Okay, so keep your hands up. How many of you live in subsidized housing? No, you all do. All of you that are homeowners live in subsidized housing. So you write off your property taxes, probably on your income tax. You have the mortgage interest deduction, which Barb was just saying. You probably get the homestead credit. And then if you sell your home, you get a capital gains. So the vast majority of people in this country that are homeowners are subsidized, and we need to understand that. And we put four times as much subsidy into your homes if you're a homeowner. I'm a homeowner. I bought the home I grew up in Fridley, from my parents in '92. So we get 4 times the subsidy that we put into affordable housing. And while I seldom disagree with John Duffy, the low-income housing tax credit came into existence in 1986. What we had prior to that is mom and pa landlords were able to do a rapid depreciation of buildings.
Yeah.
Not the greatest tax break in the world, but it allowed the small investor to do a lot of affordable housing. And affordable housing has always been done primarily in the private market. Yes, we need government. Yes, we need the faith community. We all need to be working together. But we took away those tax breaks from our small mom and pa landlords. So first in the 80s, late 70s, 60s, and 70s, we destroyed the affordable housing in our downtown areas with urban renewal. And so we created homelessness for single people. In '86 was the beginning of the development of families becoming homeless, because we moved away from having mom and pa landlords create that affordable housing into a very complicated tax syndication, which does bring in private dollars in mixing to create the low-income housing tax credit. But typically a low-income housing tax credit unit costs about $250,000 each apartment. Okay? And so what we really need to look at is how do we create a variety of housing options for folks, from very, very small homes, tiny homes, which we are working on with Envision, to manufactured home parks, to very small homes that we had after World War II. Some of you might have grown up in some of those little homes. And then, we have the larger homes too. And how do we provide all of those types of opportunities? And as people of faith, at Micah, we believe that we are to be a welcoming community of all people. You all that raised your hand that said that you were renters at some point, some community welcomed you in, okay? When you became a homeowner, how many of you had to write down on your application if you had a mental health issue, a chemical health issue, or a criminal issue? How many of you asked if you could move into your neighborhood? Oh, but we do that with people that have limited income that we're trying to do affordable housing. So we have to really think about, do we love and treat others the way that we wanted to be treated and that we were treated when we rented? Or now that I have my own, I don't want you by me, because I moved out here because I wanted to have my own little area, and I wanted to get away from all of that I was one of those renters, because I was one of those people. But I wanted to get out and have my own space, and I don't want those people around me. Well, those people are us. Because we were those people, and just because we have more resources now does not make us any better.
Thank you, Sue. I'd like to spend a few minutes also talking about some creative ways we can start providing affordable housing beyond the long process that it takes to actually construct and build and finance a project. Do any of you have any thoughts on that? What can we do today?
Certainly, we've met with the mayor, who's sitting here right in front, and
Hi,
thank you,
Ted.
Mayor. And for those of you who he publicly said this, I think I can publicly say this at our legislative breakfast, he was homeless as a youth. So he understands the issues of living in and out of a car and going to school and trying to make that all work. And we are just very proud of your leadership here in Stillwater. So thank you for being open about that at our legislative breakfast. Certainly some of the things that we've talked about is the old mother-in-law apartments, which we now call accessory dwelling units, is a way of expanding that. Doing the Share a Home program, it was a program that we had significantly in the 70s and 80s for refugees that were coming into the country, but we did it for a long time with homeless families and individuals, where we match up people that need affordable places to live with people that may need some help getting things done around their house, or help with going to the grocery store, chores, that type of thing, and having folks live together. I mean, that's really how we lived a lot as a country as we kind of developed. We're working on the creation of tiny homes, so very small homes that are more like 600 square feet, 450 square feet. And for folks that may be singles that are coming out of campsites and other things. But we really need to look much more creatively about how do we create housing that meets people's basic needs, and to really listen. And while I certainly agree with that we have a great group of folks up here, it really does not represent the people that have experienced homelessness and the housing crisis. And I don't know everybody's history up here, so I can't speak for that. But we need to have people that have experienced homelessness and the housing crisis as decision makers. That's true for Micah on our staff and on our board. This is a critical piece, as well as the diversity of all the people that live within the community. Because the options and the opportunities and the choices need to come from the people themselves, because one size does not fit all. What some people might want is a manufactured home. Other people might need, 5-6 bedroom home because they're a larger family, or they're a multi-generational family, as many of our Asian families and Somalian families and other families live together. So we need to listen to the diversity of our community as we're creating the housing options.
It's a really great commentary, Sue. Thank you. The zoning regulations in cities varies by city as far as what's allowed, as far as who you can rent to in your own home. Now, my hometown, our home city, Cindy and I live in Afton, doesn't allow you to rent a room in your house or a portion of your house to someone who isn't related to you. You can rent to a family member, but you can't rent to somebody who isn't related to you. Now, I don't know if that's true in all of Washington County, but every city has their own regulation with regard to that. But we can make it easier or harder as cities to do that. Cindy's and my first apartment together was a stairwell in a Victorian house, because that's what we could afford. It was where I lived when I was going to law school. The next place we moved to was an apartment in Afton, and then eventually we bought a house. But we couldn't do that today. That we didn't have 2 exits. There are all sorts of reasons that wasn't available. But those are the kinds of things that we might need to start looking at to try to address the issue of affordable housing in the communities where these workers, our families, these kids live. If we're going to be able to go to a coffee shop and get coffee, somebody's going to have to work there, and they're not going to drive 30 miles for that job. So it does impact all of us, and it has a huge impact. Does anybody have Barb, to add to that?
Well, there's a couple of success stories about communities in the county when it comes to this topic. So the city of Forest Lake, for example, approached the CDA and said, we want to create an opportunity next to the county library and the transit station as part of a larger PUD to create housing for seniors and for our workers. And so this was back in 2007, as I recall, and now that vision is out there today. And I challenge anybody to drive down Forest Boulevard, and you won't be able to tell the difference between which apartment building is owned by the CDA and which one is owned by the private sector. And then it's connected to now a brand new YMCA, and they're single-family homes that I'm sure have values of $500,000 and $600,000 close by. And so the city took the initiative to say, this is what we want to do, and they contributed to some of the fees for the hookup of utilities to help drive down the costs. And as I recall, I think they waived the building permit fees too for the affordable portion. The city of Woodbury has used a density increase, which is a typical tool that cities can do through their zoning requirement. So last week I was just at the grand opening of the Legends of Woodbury, which is an affordable senior housing development, and they were able to maximize their density through a provision in their zoning ordinance. So those are two good examples of where a city, if they have site control, they can accomplish what I was talking about earlier, trying to create as many options for people in the community as possible.
So would you talk a little bit about what kinds of housing strategies you can use or you could bring to the table in a completely more or less built-out city, meaning a city like Stillwater, Oak Park, Bayport, that really doesn't have room to build new housing of any great quantity? What can you do in a community like that, a mature community that's fully developed?
Well, I think oftentimes when we think about what we call a fully developed community, it really isn't, because there are properties that are changing over. Whether it's the hospital that may change over and that may be available for some redevelopment. In White Bear Lake, we've used old parking or old automobile dealership land, those types of things. So I think we really have to be creative in how we can reuse land. I think the other option God allowed me for 30 years to run Elam Transitional Housing. This is where you utilize existing housing and you rent that, and then you sublet it to folks that need affordable housing and help subsidize it. And people can either take over the rental of the unit. John certainly, Duffy Development helped with Solid Ground in Montemita area, basically in developing transitional housing, which is site-based type of transitional housing. But you can do this scattered throughout a community to provide those types of beginning opportunities for people that are making those steps either from homelessness or out of a housing crisis back into housing in the community. Again, share a home program. I think passing the accessory dwelling unit is certainly an option. Really looking at, can we look at ways that we can maintain our manufactured home parks and actually increase that? In Hugo, the city of Hugo is actually looking and working with the owner to develop additional spaces for manufactured home parks. We'll be talking with them about potentially doing additional lots for tiny homes. So I think, Habitat, we have a variety of different options that are available. I think it's mainly, and we sat and talked with the mayor here about just, starting creatively, thinking creatively about how can we utilize existing stock, how can we share that more with each other, and how can we continue to work together to be a community where everybody has an affordable place to live.
Go ahead, Cindy.
So I've heard the word community over and over and over and over. Our vision is that we believe in a community that knows we are all connected, because we really are. And the answer to affordable housing is all of us. It's community. And there's so many little pieces, and I know, Barb, you talked about how complex it is. It is complex. It isn't, we're not just talking about housing. We're talking about all the supports around housing, the transportation, the better jobs, just the higher incomes, better access to education, everybody working together, county community services, nonprofits, grandma, just everybody coming together and doing their part. And amazing things can happen. Little things can just lead to such huge things. And so I just would challenge everybody to think about what you can do to help everyone to have a home, not just a house, but a home, a place where they feel safe, wanted, welcomed, loved, And that's what healthy community is all about, and it really is up to all of us.
Clearly, that's really what it comes down to. It's not us and them, it's we. And when we start thinking in terms of we, and Barb, you've said it, or Sue, you've said it over and over, is that this is our lives. Many of us have been here before at various levels. And if we can just remember what that was like, then it's not so hard to make that transition to saying we have an obligation to do something about it. Whether it's your faith or whether it's your own personal morality, we have an obligation to help. And we have the power to do it. We just have to be aware that it's a problem and there are tools we can use to do it. Does anybody want, John, did you want to add to that? When I read your mission statement, something resonated with you that this was the field that you wanted to work in as your life's work, and it has been your life's work.
Well, yes, it has. Can I just, on the last question, can I just throw in, because of the Barron people being here?
Oh, absolutely.
Minnetonka's done a wonderful job of items to throw in. Pooled tax increment has worked really well, and then they've had really creative access and parking changes and variances that have allowed a lot more density, and it's still been acceptable in the communities and stuff. So there was a couple items there.
Coming to town, man.
Yeah, okay. Okay, thanks. I guess what would I tell another developer to do? You'd asked me that question, we were sitting there earlier. And I guess I'd say build a good product and manage it well. That's what you got to do. There was a lot of substandard housing built for many years, and it got the affordable housing industry a bad reputation. And doggone it, cities, they have requirements. It's your job to meet the expectations there. You can build a good product there. You owe it to the neighbors, you owe it to the other tenants that you've got there, and it can be done. There's just a ton of examples all over today. And I don't mean just something that looks good, I mean something that you can maintain pretty cheaply, that you can operate very efficiently. Honestly, the long-term financing is going to force you into that product, or you're going to go out of business. And the other, as far as managing, you got to be in compliance. Check, recheck your compliance. But then make sure that if something goes wrong, you fix it right. Make sure the lawn's mowed, the papers are picked up. If a neighbor has a problem, address it right away. Sponsor kids' teams, sponsor community activities. That's the stuff you got to do. You got to keep people talking to each other so that the small problems don't get into bigger issues ever. And that's you got to be a good example, because you're representing the affordable housing community, and we have to win back that reputation one project at a time, and another one, all the way through.
You're being a good neighbor. That's what it comes down to. Sue, you wanted to add something.
I think, when we talk about a community, it's a common unity. It's really coming together to make sure that everyone has a home. And while it may sound fairly complicated in what we're talking about, lots of different things, a lot of it does come down to the will of the people in the community to do it, and then also the political will to help in also increasing resources. So we have very strong bipartisan support on housing and homeless issues at the state level. And you may be surprised, but even at the federal level. So if you look again in the MICA packet and the information that we have up on our website, you will see that we had significant increases in housing dollars on the state level this last year, and significant increases over the last couple years. Even though the administration wanted to do major cuts in housing dollars and homeless dollars, we've had significant increases, and we are on track for having another significant increase in housing and homeless dollars on the federal level. It's not enough though, okay? So what we need to spend on an annual basis just in Minnesota is $1 billion in the metro area and $1 billion in greater Minnesota. We're spending about 1/4 of that. So we continue to get behind every year. We have more people that are growing older, that are becoming seniors like myself, that are on a fixed income and are not going to be able to afford housing when they leave their single family home, because they're used to just paying utilities and taxes and insurance because their home may be paid off. They're not going to be able to go out into a $1,500, $2,000 a month apartment, or into assisted living, or into memory care, which is going to be $5,000 to $15,000 a month, okay? So we really need to think that this is about all of us. And so one of the things, I'm going to ask another question. How many of you called your state representative or senator or your congressional member or senator this year? Okay. What I want you to do in your head very quickly, I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand. Think about how much money you pay in taxes. I will ask you, how many of you complain about how much you pay in taxes? Oh, not many of you. Okay. Think about how much you pay in taxes. Where else in your budget? You know, it might be, you know, $5,000, $10,000, $20,000, $30,000, whatever it is, maybe a couple thousand or $1,000 or less. Where else in your budget do you just give that money away to somebody and say, do whatever you want? That's what we do when we don't call our state senator and representative and our U.S. congressional member and U.S. senators, is we say, we'll give you our money, but we don't care what you do with it. So it's really important that we be good stewards, especially as people of faith, good stewards of the resources God has given us to manage and to say, we want these dollars to be spent this way.
So I do appreciate the sacrifice that everyone made to be here and to talk about this issue. It's important. It hits home to me. And I had a couple thoughts just sitting here. One of the things that I do pretty much every single day is I grew up on 6th Street between Olive and Pine. And that was the first apartment we had in Stillwater. And it was, at one point it was a single family house. And I drive by it because that was the safest I ever felt as a child. It was where we first moved to Stillwater and where I got to discover Stillwater and how wonderful of a community it was. And it was just a great place to live. I could skateboard downtown, buy slingshots and BB guns at the Outfitters on Main Street. I mean, it was absolutely, jump in the river. Apparently you're not supposed to do that, but I thought swimming in Lowell Park was a great idea. And I never ever jumped off the Stillwater lift bridge. But I love growing up in town, and I drive by this every day. And what just kind of occurred to me is it's a single family home. When I lived there, it was 4 apartments, and they were affordable. And, someone bought it, and I've always looked at that house going, if I ever have the opportunity, I'm buying that house, right? But it just occurred to me today that the house next door to it was, I think, broken up into 6 apartments that at the time were probably affordable. And now it's a very nice, restored Victorian home on 6th Street. And as the mayor, I drive by and I go, wow, isn't this great? These places were, when we lived there, they're kind of dumpy. And now they're beautiful and they're back to their glory. But it never occurred to me until sitting here today that now we have probably 10 less affordable rental units in Stillwater, right? And so I guess one of my questions, and I'll let you guys answer them when I'm done, but how do you prevent that, right? I mean, I think Stillwater, as I drive around, I was just thinking in my head, there are tons of examples of those big Victorians, which at one point were too hard for single families to manage. They were expensive to heat, utilities were expensive. It was too much square footage for your average family. And so they got broken into, either B&Bs or broken up into apartments. And I don't know how you prevent that from happening, right? I mean, but we're losing that kind of organic, natural, affordable housing stock in Stillwater, but it's due to something that also is, probably perceived by many to be a positive change, right? They're restoring this beautiful Victorian and putting it in a great condition, but we're also losing something with that. And so I guess I'd like everybody to consider that. Like when you see that, what to me, until I walked in the door here this evening, it was something I saw as a positive change for our community. Taking something old that wasn't in the best shape and making it beautiful. And what I'm realizing is that is still positive, but there's a cost to that, and the cost is less affordable housing. So I guess I would challenge everybody to keep that in mind. The other thing is the accessory housing or the mother-in-law housing. I just got to say to everybody up here, I wish you would have been here when that ordinance came through Stillwater, because as a council, I don't think we considered the affordability aspect of it. We did not consider that as part of the positive impact that could have. We kind of looked at it and scoffed and said, who wants to put grandma in the backyard? I mean, seriously, that was the kind of discussion, like we didn't think it made sense for our community. And had we been working with you or had somebody else, kind of present that to us, I think there might have been a different outcome. And so I'm going to promise everybody that we're going to revisit that, because that makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of people, the people that are struggling to pay their mortgage. Maybe it's easier if they can put an affordable accessory building in their backyard, right? Maybe that can help that homeowner pay their mortgage and also provide affordable housing for somebody in our community. And then the last thing that I'm thinking about is, when does this become a wage issue versus an affordability issue, right? I mean, I think everybody up here said there's not enough dollars to build our way out of this, right? So people have to earn more, right? And so, and that's just an honest question. I don't know at what point. I think it's hard for me because, Stillwater is beautiful. It's a gorgeous town. People want to live here, no offense to Oakdale, but it's going to be more expensive to live in Stillwater. The person at the gas station isn't going to make any more for working in Stillwater than that person's going to make living in Oakdale. And so my second question would be, how do we reconcile with that, right? It's always going to be more expensive to live in Stillwater. It's gorgeous. I mean, right? We've got a river, and a beautiful downtown. But the people in the service industry, unless you're a waiter at one of our fancy restaurants or something, are probably not making any more than what that same position would be in a more affordable community. And so how do you reconcile that?
So, Mayor, let me try a few of those real quick.
Okay.
I'll do it real quick.
Sorry, I'm done.
So the first one, I suggest that you talk with John about the type of ways that people pay into a fund. So if somebody wants to decrease the density of their housing unit, then they would pay into a fund to create affordable housing.
There you go.
That's one way to do that. I applaud you to get the ADU, the accessory dwelling unit, to have happen. And then I think some of the things that we're working on the federal level in regards to both wages and housing. So obviously, Nixon was the first one that really came up with the negative income tax, or basically a guaranteed annual income. That's something that's been talked about by some of the Democrats right now. That's one way of providing basically a basic income, and then people work beyond that, similar to somewhat the family earned income tax credit. But another one that Senator Booker and Senator Harris and other people are also looking at is a tax credit for renters. Not for, that you get your tax property back that you get in August. But if you pay more than 30% of your income for housing, you would get a tax credit to cover that. And that would be available to you on a monthly basis. So I think there are ways. I'm a small business owner. I own a 103-year-old country store 4 hours north of here. We pay $10 an hour. But if we went to $15 an hour, we would close. Because we can't make the money. We're losing money right now. So I think we have to figure out, how do we create opportunities for people to afford the housing, and we can do that through our tax system, just like we subsidize us as homeowners right now.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hey, Ted, thank you very much.
Yeah,
I really appreciate it.
I'll go back to my spot.
Go back to your spot. Ted answered a couple of the questions that were asked here in advance, and that is, what is the commitment of this community of Stillwater to do something about the affordable housing crisis in this town? You're going to get held to that.
Good.
All right, and hopefully bring some fellow city council members along, because I know their people are intelligent, they love this community, they love the people that live here, and if they're exposed to additional information, I think maybe there'll be a different outcome. I'm going to ask a couple of the other questions. Some of these are duplicative, or we've answered them already since you've asked them, so if I don't get to all of them, we're kind of running out of time. Thank you. Why do all municipalities refuse 250 to 400 square foot homes, aka tiny homes? I would like to see this as an option for homes resting on a full basement. You've done some work in that area. Could you talk about that, Sue?
Sure. So there's a wide variety of tiny homes. I encourage you, if you've not looked at some of the YouTube stuff that we're doing in Detroit, Michigan right now, it's tiny home ownership. Just YouTube at tiny homes. It's very cool looking. City of Minneapolis has already put into their ordinances that tiny homes are permittable throughout the city, and we have other communities that are starting to do that. We have tiny homes that are now being allowed in a number of the manufactured home parks. So I think that this is something that all communities should take a look at as an option for housing for folks.
We've talked about this a little bit, but I think this is a really good takeaway. What can private individuals do to address the lack of affordable housing? What can we do? You walk out here today, What can you do tomorrow morning? Go ahead,
So
sir.
so if you look quickly again in the MICA packet on the back side of the out of reach, that'll give you really quick ways that you can address the housing crisis. As a person of faith, we say pray, love and treat others as yourself, be a welcoming community member. If you aren't involved in the immediate needs, helping Cynthia with the immediate needs of people here in Washington County, do that. Then work in helping us advocate on the local level with the mayor, on the regional level, state and federal level, gives you some talking points about how to kind of move through that. We have a policy notebook that will help you very quickly get up to speed on all this different data and stuff, and then just some talking points of how you talk with your policymaker and how you write notes.
And real quick here too, there's a collaborative here in the county called Heading Home Washington, and so feel free to talk to Cynthia or myself about that to participate. And also, I would suggest too to get to know your community. Each community has a comprehensive plan, and that plan has a housing chapter. So find out what the spectrum of housing that your community is trying to accomplish, and get involved. Educate yourself and get involved.
And this is, John, did you have something you wanted to add to that?
I was basically going to say there's a lot of committees to get on. Comprehensive plan is a big one. It is political, it's frustrating, but all these committees, do your part. And if enough people do their part, there will be new options come open.
Yeah, and that was the question that was on this card right here that you just answered, John. That was really good. I didn't have to ask it.
Oh.
What committees are there? What cities have gotten out there and have made these ordinance changes? Sue, do you know some things, and John, of some area communities we could point some of our local leaders to as examples of communities that have really kind of taken this on?
So I think White Bear Lake has done a great job. Hugo is really stepping up more. Montemita is starting to step up more. But I think, Stillwater is really taking some big steps. We have a MICA Northeast chapter that meets between Washington County and Ramsey County. So we meet between Montemita and White Bear Lake, and we are over here a couple times. We do have a meeting on October 15th at the library at 6 o'clock. So we'll be getting information out to all of you on that, and encourage you to join us here at the Stillwater Library as we continue this kind of conversation.
Thank you very much. It's quarter to 8, and I think we should wrap up. But what I'd like to encourage you all to do is stay a little bit and join us out in the narthex for a continued conversation, informal conversation. Some of us will be able to stay for a little bit longer and continue the conversation, because it's really, really important that we do that. Barb, did you have something you wanted to add? You had that look of, I'm adding something.
I didn't mean to, but there's information out on the table about the Community Development Agency. My business cards are there. I'm happy to come speak to your groups at any point.
Take advantage of all the information that these folks have brought here. It's really amazing, and you'll learn a lot about the subject, and you'll learn more in depth about what you can do by engaging these different groups in their missions to affect positive change around the issue of affordable housing. Thank you all for being here tonight.